I think that the building of friendships is one of the most vital and sustaining requirements for a maturing generation. Because with the mental health issues, the stress that comes from isolation, brought about by devices and technology, the human nature of friendship is the only antidote to the loneliness that is crippling a generation.
Hey crew, it's Adam. You're listening to The Conversation. We are now at episode 257, and today we are talking with one of my favorite humans, an older man that I've gotten to know over the last 8 or so years, who is filled with wisdom. And today we are talking about something that is so necessary in our lives, and yet it's becoming more and more rare. Today we are talking about friendships, actually having friends in our lives. Friends, today, wherever you are, I'm so glad you're tuning in. And in these next 28 or so minutes, my hope is if you're trying to figure out how to make a difference with your life, or you're walking through an unpretty part of being human, I want you to know that you are not alone. Well, before we go any further, I want and I need to give a huge shout out to our partners. Each week, these partners help make the conversation possible. They're also businesses and organizations that I know and trust that I want you to know about as well. Our first partner is Vern Eide. Vern Eide Motor Cars is a faith-based, employee-owned company that sells cars, trucks, tractors, boats, snowmobiles, and so much more. They sell Hondas, Fords, Acuras, Chevy, GMC, you name the make of vehicle, and they most likely have it. I personally have just purchased my third vehicle, a new Outlander from them, and I absolutely love it. Throughout the process, Vern Eide was incredible to work with. I never felt an ounce of pressure or urgency in them whatsoever. No matter what kind of vehicle you're looking for and no matter where you live, they will ship it to you. Go visit verneide.com. Again, that's verneide.com. Our second partner is Generous Coffee. Generous Coffee doesn't just sell delicious coffee. They also make a positive impact by donating 100% of the profit they make to nonprofits who help others around the world. The church I pastor brews Generous Coffee every single week, and the response has been fantastic. If your church or business brews coffee, you can buy it in bulk order, and price-wise, they were cheaper or at the same price as every other place that we looked at. I can't say enough about them. Go find out more at generouscoffee.com. Again, that's generouscoffee.com. Well, today, as I mentioned, I sat down with one of my friends, Ken Costa, and Ken is an investment banker from London, a man who deeply loves God and also deeply loves people. As I've mentioned, I've known him for years. I've been to his house in London, and he's been to my church here in South Dakota. Today, though, we discussed the $100 trillion wealth transfer that is taking place in our world right now as we speak, which is insane to think about. But more than that, in our conversation, we talk about friendship, how to have and build good friendships, which might sound like a childish topic to talk about. Having friends should be easy, right? And yet I honestly believe that fewer and fewer people have deep friendships. And so on that note, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation. Well, Ken, I think oftentimes we hear highlight reels. Are you willing to share about a current unpretty part of your life? Is there anything currently in your life that's stressful, a source of grief, a source of pain?
Well, that's quite some way to start. I mean, do you know? I think I've been reflecting on as one gets older, so you have to readjust to new realities. And the intriguing thing about relationships is that what most people forget is that relationships are dynamic, not static. That most people remember a relationship that forms in its inception, and that's how it stays. But actually, relationships change over the period of engagement. And I think that of the most difficult things is to be able to accept that the relationships that were very intense in an earlier phase of life actually are not as forthcoming, fulfilling as life changes. And I think that that's a difficulty and quite hard to govern, particularly as you get older. Let me give you an example that
Yes.
applies in a church context. So the youth leader is appointed by the pastor aged 30, let's say. The youth leader grows up. The pastor still thinks the youth leader's 30. The youth leader is now 38. And the relationship between the two is settled at that initial date. It creates an enormous tension in people's lives because they themselves find that they can't adjust to it. So I think this call to make sure that we adjust to a dynamic change, and particularly generationally, and we'll get on to that,
Yep.
is I think a very important sort of equipment, not only just of the leaders of whether in church or in business or wherever, but for any person, homemakers and people who have formed relationships and then find that these are difficult as we grow older.
Is that, Ken, and share as little or as much as you'd like, in the area of friendships, has that been a place of friction inside of you of what to do with that? And
Sure,
I've honestly, I've sensed that same thing in some of my relationships. Is there a right way to respond? Is it okay for friendships specifically to come and go? Any wisdom? Friendship, I think, is something I'm hungry for, and I'm so grateful that I actually have it right now. And I've probably had the last 5 years of my life, but so many people don't. Any other thoughts on that thread?
Well, firstly, in John's Gospel, I once asked David Ford, who's a professor of theology at Cambridge University, wrote one of the best theological commentaries on John's Gospel, what was the most important word in John's Gospel? And the answer was friend. And I think that the building of friendships is one of the most vital and sustaining requirements for a maturing generation. Because with the mental health issues, the stress that comes from isolation, brought about by devices and technology, the human nature of friendship is the only antidote to the loneliness that is crippling a generation, and as a generation suffers from the inability to have normal social intercourse with each other because they become so unused to it. Working from home in front of a computer, so that friendships become the vital piece, but they change, and your new friends are sort of difficult to draw alongside, but very important too. And existing friendships need to be kept, as Dr. Johnson said in his great dictionary, need to be kept in good repair. And one does have to keep them in good repair, which means one does have to work at it. You have to see people. You have to, remember the text, but also the voice conversation that is required. So it's an essential part of well-being. Very, very topical word everywhere at the moment. Everybody wants to be in well-being, but friendships are the key of sustainable well-being, and that, of course, is what Jesus modeled. As set out in John's Gospel.
That's so good. One last question on friendship, and I didn't expect to even talk about friendship. Any advice that you'd have on having long-term friendships? Is there anything that you've done well or anything that you've not done well that has harmed that?
Well, I think that the building of the friendships means that one actually assumes as they start that there is an identity of interest and affinity. We both like what you would call soccer and what is properly known as football. That we are, you start with something that is common, but after a while you have to do a reset because life changes. People develop different interests, and therefore, in order to develop a strong friendship, you would need to want to understand what your friend's changing interests in his life, her life is, and come alongside it, learn a bit more about it. Even though, why do you do that? Because you want to keep the friendships in good repair.
Yeah,
and that I think is the best thing one can say is both to check, to watch the nuances of change in their levels of interest, and without being artificial, actually show an interest in something that you may have no idea of what it is, nor what initiated the friendship.
that's so good. I think I'm curious about friendship. I just left lunch with 3 of my long time friends, and it was kind of the last thing I had time for today. And yet, as I left, I'm like, that is the most important thing that I can say yes to. Away from my wife and the Lord himself, is saying yes to those times with my friends, even when I don't feel like I have the time to do so. So thanks for talking about that. So Ken, I want to shift the $100 trillion wealth transfer. You have a book on it. By the hand of God, I ended up at our mutual friend Luke Lazan's church down in Orlando the Sunday that he was interviewing you, which I still can't believe. If you just want to share, first off, what is the $100 trillion wealth transfer? Let's start there.
Sure. So what is going to happen is that the boomer generation, of which I am an exemplar born after the Second World War, have built up extraordinary assets as a result of low interest rates and asset inflation over the last decades. That is going to transfer to the next generation, who I call the Zennial generation, the millennials and Gen Z. And they are about to inherit $100 trillion, of which about 70 odd trillion will come from the United States. Now, you would say, oh, well, Ken, I mean, this is very obvious. People die, and therefore a next generation inherits.
Yeah.
Not so. There are distinguishing features. The first, we've never seen such a tsunami of wealth that will transfer. It's enormous. Now, you may say, oh, well, that happens in 10 years' time. No, it doesn't, because the most important bank at the moment for the generation is BOMAD. Do you know the BOMAD Bank?
I do not know.
You won't.
I don't. No.
It's the Bank of Mum and Dad. And Bank of Mum and Dad is the one that is helping the generation put down deposits for the home, pay some of the rent, help in the college fees. And that's already happening. But it's different in another respect. Firstly, it's the quantity. Secondly, normally wealth transfers from one generation to another. But in this case, it is transferring with very significant power. And that is the power on technology, a generation that is very well versed in technology, digital natives, able to read the room well and the world well as to where it's going. In terms of influence, social media influence like we've never seen before. And they have a very clear agenda as to what they want to see happening with the wealth as it is transferred in terms of justice, fairness, the environment, sustainability, race, etc. So you've got this combination happening at the same time. Now, this is not just purely a financial matter.
Yeah.
It is of profound consequence for financially, socially, emotionally, and also, I think, spiritually.
Ken, if you want to start, why would this matter for business leaders? And if there's any wisdom for a business leader of, hey, you're going to want to take note of this, or you're going to want to look into this, or whatever.
Sure. The reason for it is this. At the moment, the tribes are divided. There is a clash of generations. You have, on the one hand, a boomer generation looking at the Zennials and saying this is a feckless group of smashed avocado eaters whose only crisis is when the battery runs out of the smart device. At the same time, the Zoomers look at the boomers and say, you analog types, you're emotionally constipated, you can't engage properly, you've lived off the fat of the land, and we can't buy our own homes because you've taken it all. So, and those divisions are very serious, because as they become more sort of siloed and lobbing insults across to each other, so you're getting a generation that is becoming more angry, less involved in wanting to find compromise, to be finding reconciliation. And that has a bad effect, both in the business community and as well as socially. And It has a bad effect on the market economy, because we are going to have to learn to work together. And the way I put it is this: we need the hindsight of my generation, the insight of the next, because they can look forward, and that creates a foresight for what will be coming and how there is a purpose in what is to be done.
So that Sunday that I was at Luke's church, you made me feel really old for the very first time, because you had everyone over the age of 40 stand. And what you were trying to do is, hey, if you're older, stand. It was the first time that I've ever fell into that older category. So I was like, I officially feel really old. What would your advice be, though, for a 40-something or a 30-something, and how to bridge that gap? And again, as a business leader, I'm trying to talk it in the secular business field for right now. What would your advice be for bridging that gap between the two silos? And also, is there any way is there anything insight-wise that you'd say, Ken, of like, here's how to really harness this transfer business-wise?
Sure. So let me give you the answer as I give in the book to the crisis. The answer, 2 letters, CO, co. Now, we know about co-living, co-investing, cooperating. We bandy that about, but we have not developed a philosophical concept of co-destiny, by which I mean that we need to work together to determine a common destiny as an undergirding of the belief that which you gain by working together is far more than that which you lose by trying to do it on your own. Yeah. That's the overall picture. But you rightly ask the practical question: what can we do? And one of the things that I've done is to be very active in mentoring, coaching, advising, at times rebuking people in that next generation. And I've done it with my son. He's created a wonderful meditation app called Glorify, like Spotify, for Christian Bible reading, of which I'm the chairman. It's a mentoring process. On the other, I think there is the practical, the basic practical thing of being able to say, and that's in a community, in a church, in a business, wherever it happens to be, of drawing alongside an older, a wiser person who's been through inflation, who knows what recession looks like, and a creative person who is very, sort of fearless, wanting to conquer the world. So it's in that mentoring and coaching capacity where the one is prepared to invest in that generation, and also on the other side, where the Zennial turns to the senior person and respects the wisdom that is being handed over. And that, I think, is the best way that one can practically engage with this working towards a co-destiny.
When I think of you, you're older in age than I am, and yet oftentimes when I'm in a room with you, you feel like you're younger than I am. You have this unique ability, and I think this curiosity inside you. Is there any wisdom? I'm currently 42 years old. Any wisdom for me, most of my life, I've been trying to learn from folks older than me and crave that. Like I feel like I can't spend enough time with 60-year-olds and older just to learn from them. Is there any advice that you live out every single day that I've known you of beginning to pour into the younger generation? I mean, I got gray hairs, I'm bald. Is there, what is that in you that makes you so curious about the younger generation? And again, any just practical advice to doing that?
Yeah, well, a great question, because it's a two-way street. It works both ways. Let me give you a classic example. I was brought up to get feedback, and no doubt you do that in your environment, your church, your community, your business. Everybody wants feedback. However, a new generation is in place who want feed forward. They don't want feedback. What they want to do is they want to be assessed on their ability to look forward and to be able to gauge where it is that the corporation, the church, the society is actually moving to, and to be respected and rewarded for that contribution. Now, personally, I find that it piques my curiosity, my interest in a changing world. How do we navigate this changing world? Now, there's no point in my trying to do it on my own, but I want to see it through the eyes of a generation which is itself, quite complicated to understand. I mean, it's but that key piece of being able to working together to understand that we respect each other. It's a two-way street. I learn from them, partly not necessarily the wisdom of age or of being through economic cycles.
Yeah.
But the lack of timidity or fear as to what ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, blockchain will bring about to a society that a generation generally fears and another generation can't wait to get their hands on.
Yeah, that's so good. Kind of a similar question. You like Brad Lomenick, I feel like know everyone. Any advice to connecting other people together, whether it's two mutual friends that need to meet, or when you're in a room of high caliber individuals, whether they're 25 years old and have 1 million followers on Instagram, or they're 60 some years old and they have millions of dollars in the bank, any advice on how to connect with them well and how to grow your relationship? So that's two different things, but how to connect people well, and I think they're both are connected, but how to connect people well and how to connect to individuals that are high level. I'm just going to turn you loose again.
So here's the question. You cannot form a relationship with everybody you meet, nor with other people who want to have one with you. So what do? A famous pastor who, because the name might divide your tender audience, whose name shall be nameless. A famous pastor once said to me, when I asked that question, he said, it's like a key in a lock. When you meet somebody and you put the key in the lock and you turn it and it goes click, stay with that person, because this is the Spirit of God that is alerting you to something in that person. And if it doesn't, if there's no immediate response, then move on, because you can't cultivate as many can. So that would be the first piece, is to believe that connection, that the drawing together is actually a spiritual activity. It's not just just something, I like Adam, which I do, and therefore if if you like me, you must like Adam. It's not. It's not something that will make me become the center of some networking hub. But to the modern generation, we would say, I would say, take me to your leader. And as I develop in the book, the equivalent is take me to your network. Take me to the interlinking nodes, the friendship nodes that pull together this very powerful grouping of friendship. And then out of that, of course, one does assess, and some people are better skilled at it than others, and particularly modern CEOs all have to have huge emotional intelligence to be able to do the connection, because unless there is a person motivated to do what the task is, you could be as active and as analytically good as you like, but it will not bind together an organization.
That's so true. I think for when I was younger, I was always hesitant to connect two people out of the potential fear that I would be unneeded in the equation. And I have to say again, this is from Brad Lomenick, it's just the opposite. I find the more you are a connector and so generous with connections, the more too just God begins to open doors and elevate things.
True, but you must be careful of one thing, that it's not merely a functionality. This is kind of what I do. I float around conferences and places like that, putting people together because it's a kind of function.
Yeah.
It's only credible if it's relationally authentic, such that there is a genuine reason for drawing people together, rather than just I'm in the middle of a spider web and I can sort of link a whole bunch of people together, which is purely functionality, which just doesn't work. And it certainly doesn't work with a generation, I'll tell you that.
That's so good. Thanks for that. Ken, last thing I want to ask you about, I always feel like you have such a sense of where God is moving and about to move, even the times that you've been at Embrace and spoken into my life. You just have such a pulse on the direction and movement of God. Is how I know it's time with the Lord, it's longevity in your relationship with Him. If you had to give 2 or 3 tangible things on how to continue to lean into that, and honestly, a part of it is just a special gifting that you have, and each of us has different gifts. But is there anything that you would say of how to lean into knowing the will of God in some different areas that you do?
Well, the first thing I think is, you've got to get the spiritual formation right. And once you've got the spiritual formation, reading the Bible, meditating, meeting friends, generous with your money, prepared to put yourself out to help others, volunteering, any of those things that go for spiritual formation, and of course pray. Once you've got that right, you've got to trust the instincts that the Spirit of God is nudging. So I regard it as an enormous privilege whenever I'm meeting somebody, and that happens to be whether it's a banker or a worship leader, is to see what it is that I can draw out of that person who doesn't actually know that they have that gift, or need some affirmation of a gift that God has implanted in them, which has been suffocated within them. And the ability to be able to draw that out is a hugely encouraging gifting. But it is a gift. But it's not a gift that is given to the select few. It is a gift of the Spirit. And I think one asks the Spirit of God to lead you in those relationships, to draw out, and to ask the simple questions like, what does God know about you, Adam, that you don't know about yourself? And that's quite a lot. But a third party can come and help unpack that, which becomes a great privilege to be able to see people affirmed in what they've been created to do, rather than that which they have molded themselves into becoming, and at the end of the day have suffered the very difficult mental issues that come from when you live in two completely conflicting worlds.
Yeah. Ken, do you when you're mid-conversation, leading up to a conversation of meeting with someone, are you internally asking the Holy Spirit to speak to you? Is there, is that a conscious thing that you're asking that internally of Him? Anything?
Well, sometimes. Otherwise, I mean, you become sort of slightly spiritually or freakish. You want to, at the end of the day, you want to be normal. God has created us with normal emotions, aspirations, hopes, etc. So, no, I don't do it all the time on the basis that I understand that is a gift that is naturally given.
Yeah.
But there are times when one is engaged in a serious conversation, and here's the test. The test would be, is it reciprocated? In other words, if I throw something out to somebody, or I take a risk and mention something, sometimes it's a word of knowledge, which God gives us. If it's reciprocated, at that moment, I know you want to be more involved. If it's not, we discuss the soccer. It's you want to move on. So there are the tests. The tests would be, I think, those nudges of the Spirit, but also to see whether it's falling on fertile pearls before swine. Hard saying of Jesus, hard saying, but a true, because some people cannot or will not process what God is wanting to do, and all you will do is cast great help or wisdom or whatever it is onto unfertile soil.
Yeah.
Not worth it.
Last question. Is there a time that you hear most clearly from God? Is it when you are still? And is there any specific practices with silence or quiet that make it more where you're able to more clearly hear God?
No, I think I'm hopeless at it. The moments of greatest clarity is when speaking directly to people on the spot, in times of ministry, times of encouragement, times of rebuke, sensing that that there is an opening, that God wants to encourage someone, to comfort, but also to confront, and to know that is a gift that God has given to enable one to do that. But trying to sort it out for myself and my own life is complicated. Yes, of course we try and we'll pray, meditate, read the Bible, and the words of Scripture comes alive. To be able to hear God in the words of the Scriptures.
Well, thanks again to my amazing guest, Ken Costa. Ken, I love you and I appreciate you so much. Thanks to our partners, Vern Eide and Generous Coffee, who helped make this episode possible. Please go find out more about the both of them. And lastly, but not leastly, thanks to each and every one of you who listens to the conversation. I'm so grateful. Have a great rest of your day.